Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Mary Magnuson, and on behalf of the Blandin Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on partnership models. This is one in a series of monthly webinars we're offering for our Blandin broadband communities and open to anyone with an interest in using technology to improve community. Before we begin, I'll point to the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. To interact with us at any time during today's webinar, you can simply type your question or comment into the chat box. And now let's get started. Again, my name is Mary Magnuson. I work here at the Blandin Foundation, and I administer the Blandin Community Broadband Program. Joining me today is Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors, who I'm sure many of you know. Bill has been Blandin Foundation's primary broadband program consultant for a number of years. Bill will introduce our guest speakers today. They are Jane Leonard, hopefully from the Deed Office of Broadband, Patrick Hagerty from Centurylink, Lyle McVeigh of Northeast Service Cooperative, Kyle Oldry of Knott County, and Whitney Ridlon of Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation Board. Bill?
Thank you, Mary. Public-private partnerships are something that are, if you read any broadband guide, community broadband guide, the idea of getting into a public-private partnership to solve broadband problems is high on the list of the advice that's present there. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and they say you should exercise more and eat less. It's extremely common, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. And so today's presentation is going to be about, I'm going to do a general overview of partnerships, but then we're going to jump into some very specific examples of successful partnerships that are now moving forward as a result of some new partners and certainly some new partnering together. And so the question, of course, is to partner or not to partner. And you can see both the benefits and the risks here of partnering. And certainly the benefit to improve broadband service is the goal of why people jump in to provide these services. We've seen now that in many parts of unserved and underserved areas, there's just essentially a market failure where the expected revenues that will be generated by a network just do not meet the investor needs for private sector investor needs to trigger their investment. So partnering can help increase the private sector return on investment. Certainly lessens the community financial input required. They're going to do that themselves, spreads the risk around. It certainly makes it an easier political sell. We've seen a lot of resistance to local units of government or counties jumping in to become a broadband provider because of the lack of experience in a public or private sector provider partner certainly lessens some of those political issues. And then certainly leverages partner strengths. The providers have the experience to deliver broadband services, and the communities, local units of government have financial resources, have a long-term time horizon for considering investments and so on. Of course, to partner then, when you have a partner, you have a loss of control. You now have other people's interests that you're trying to balance with your own. You could enter into an agreement that wasn't balanced, where the private sector would profit, but in case of success, but the public sector takes all the losses in the case of things not going right. And so that certainly making sure you have a balanced agreement is important. And then when you pick a partner, whether because you pick the wrong person or the partner changes over time, you can see there's issues there where sometimes partners don't perform as you expect. And so that is a risk as well. And that goes back to loss of control. If your provider partner is providing poor service, it's hard for the public sector provider to jump in and fix that problem, even though the phones might be ringing at City Hall or at the county courthouse. So when you select a partner, there's important things to think about. And number one is understanding your own purposes for getting into the broadband partnership. And you can see this list here. And there are certain trade-offs. If you want ubiquity of connectivity throughout a rural county, then affordability is going to be an issue. If you want competition, then that makes maybe you need to put in more dollars to be more attractive to multiple providers. Because if you have multiple providers, then there's more risk to those providers. Some communities go into this with an economic development goal, and that may be overall economic development or just making sure that you have fiber optics in the industrial park. I'd finally then encourage you to take your time and to be able to set a good partnership agreement in place. And the flip side is to know the partner and make sure you have compatible goals, that they have a good reputation, you understand their technology preferences and it fits with what you're talking about, and that there's a long-term ownership plan for the network that you're creating through this partnership. There's different ways to partner with a direct financial participation. You can see those kind of things on the left-hand side. Selling bonds or capital leases are on the long-term financing of the network. You can reduce costs through permit reduction in permit fees or so on. And then the final item there, prepay for services through long-term contract. It's the way that the city of Minneapolis entered into a partner with US Internet to provide a citywide wireless network service. So they paid for 10 years of service up front and allowed that small company to have the capital to move forward. And then you can see the non-cash values here, organizing, aggregating the major customers into a central market for bundle those customers up for a single provider, a low-cost office space. We've seen that in the Rendell-Sibley County area where they're now launching their construction, community marketing events, and then jumping forward on ensuring prompt permitting and inspection. In the Google fiber cities, when they're partnering with Google, with permitting and inspections and the reduction in costs of right-of-way fees and permit fees is one of the major things that Google really demands when they're partnering with a community. This is a table that I created now actually a couple years ago, but you can see depending on what your project goals are, and those are down the left-hand column, or what your your partnership model is across the top, you can kind of see how these different partnership models affect different project goals. So this will be available for you to look at online after the webinar. But I just want to show you that the choices you make with your partnering format is going to have a big impact on reaching the specific goals you have. So that's why it's critically important to understand what your own goals are as you move into these partnerships. That partnership agreement, which certainly is going to be a significant legal document and requires some good lawyering, it lays out all these different kind of things: information sharing, decision making, dispute resolution, a process for parting ways if the partnership doesn't work out. But obviously, this relies on people and processes to cement that long-term relationship. So I think we'll hear about some of these agreements as we move forward here today, and as well as the goals they've had for their creating their partnerships. So that is my presentation, just to set the stage for our people who are really doing the partnering to talk. And first, I'm going to call on Jane Leonard, and Jane is a staff person at the Deed Office of Broadband, and she's been working with projects across the state And Jane can tell us a little bit about what they're seeing in the partnership models that are coming across in their application. Jane, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me okay? I apologize for not coming on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You sound great.
Okay, sorry. We've been kind of hustling around here today trying to work with the legislature on the funding for next year, so or for this year coming. So I apologize for my tardiness, but thanks for a little bit of time here, Bill. And Mary, I'm going to ask you to help me on this because I can't see the screen. I'm here at the Office of Broadband and I'm not online. So
I'm on it, Jane.
Okay, thanks. So if you can go to the rural telephones slide, I put this in because those of you who know me know that I'm a student of history as well as of telecommunications and broadband and all that. And this is from the 1908 Minnesota Farmers Institute Annual, which was in a trash bin at the Ag Econ department at the University of Minnesota many years ago. And it's got all sorts of great tips about how to improve your rural communities. And one of the chapters is by Nathaniel Holmberg, who was the first Commissioner of Agriculture in Minnesota and a state representative and a state senator. And he wrote this from his experience starting a telephone cooperative in Renville, Minnesota. He also helped start the Land O'Lakes Cooperative. And it's, to me, just a reminder that partnerships of many kinds have been with us for a long time, and Minnesota is a state of partnerships, a state of cooperation, if you will. And I just highlighted a couple things in this, and it's actually excerpted to start with, but I just thought that it was a good way to remind ourselves that partnerships have been around for a long time, and we're usually pretty good at it here in Minnesota. In fact, what Commissioner Holmberg reminds us about is that for good-natured, it's right to form a mutual company, and the best results can be had by joining the Village Exchange because the service is better and it has a tendency to promote good feeling between the town and country people. There's some wisdom in here that I think is useful as we move forward talking about the partnerships. And let me get to the next slide here, Mary, if you can help me. It's a list of all the awarded projects. You've probably seen this before. And you see the different amounts of funding there because each project is different size, different conditions in terms of what people are dealing with on the ground. And I point that out because every single project that we have right now is really a different kind of partnership model. There are some that are, completely equal partners between a telephone provider or a telecommunications provider, something like the telecommunications cooperatives in particular, who are across our state, alongside county government, alongside some community groups that have pulled together thanks to the help of Blandin and others. So there's no one size fits all, and I think you'll hear that from the speakers going forward. And I think that's the beauty of this, is that while that can be somewhat complicated, partnerships fit whatever needs there are on the ground, and how the dynamics of those work. I was just up in Mora yesterday, Knott County, talking to the Knott Broadband Initiative group, which is another group with Blandin, and talking to the county commissioners, and they're thinking about applying for the grant this next round. And their partnership model is a kind of a three-way model of the county looking at potentially bond funds, which you'll hear a little bit more about, I think, from some of our other speakers, and a provider stepping in to help, and a community group such as the Knott broadband initiative. So I think, as Bill pointed out, and I will emphasize, partnerships come in all shapes and sizes and different dynamics, and you need to take a really good look at what kinds of resources you have on the ground, and the kind of leadership that you have in place or emerging in place, and fit the partnership to that, whatever is going to work. And the partnership may actually evolve over time as well. There might be a certain partnership to get things started, kind of as a catalyst, as has happened with many of these grant projects. And then as work continues, other players step forward and the partnership evolves. In the maybe half a minute or so that I have remaining, I think, on my time, if we can move to the next slide, Mary, I just wanted to give people a quick heads up about where we're at with the funding for the border-to-border broadband development grant program. It is in discussion right now with the group of legislators that are meeting with the governor. The governor had recommended $30 million. There are numerous amounts floating around. We just don't know what's going to happen until the session ends. So that's pretty much all I can say at this point, but we're hopeful that there will be another round, and that certainly the projects that are underway right now will continue to be working all the way into the end of 2016. So we will certainly be actively working with them, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of days here to move forward with the second round. And then the final slide is just a way to get a hold of all of us, myself included, and I just want to thank you for your time. And Bill, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Jane. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we have
Thank you.
a team of people talking about some projects in northern Minnesota. And of course, northern Minnesota is home to a lot of iron mining, and the Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation Board, which was one of really the first state agency to get involved with community broadband initiatives, with a Do It initiative, Do IT initiative now probably a decade ago. And but they've walked away from that and now are back. And we have Whitney Midland from Iron Range Resources Rehabilitation Board with us. And they've kind of served as a fulcrum to leverage projects there in northern Minnesota, and have two projects that were funded in partnership with FEED and private sector providers. Whitney, why don't you take over?
So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So the IRRB is a state economic development agency in northeastern Minnesota. I provided a map there so that everyone can kind of get a grasp for our service area. And really, the IRRB understands the economic impacts of having better broadband in the rural areas. We hear from the constituents that they need better broadband in rural areas. So what really set the stage to make IRRB get back in the game, as you said, 10 years ago, there was some momentum on broadband, and it kind of just disappeared for a while. But we're back at it, and basically what it was the state of Minnesota DEED and the Office of Broadband really took the lead, setting the statewide goal for broadband speeds and creating the grant program to fund broadband. The IRRB also realized investing in broadband aligns with our vision and our strategies to advance regional growth and prepare communities for growth and change. So with all these factors, it led the IRRB to dedicate some grant funding as a pilot towards partnering as a funder partner on rural broadband expansion projects. So we've acknowledged that the providers have a bottom line and they won't fill this gap if it doesn't make financial sense. So we want to be involved in the expansion of broadband into these rural areas. So now, kind of knowing why the IRRB is interested in funding these broadband expansion projects, it was now what's the next step? How do we find the projects, the providers, what do we do next? And so we held meetings with the providers to try to build positive relationships, to know who to contact, and to find projects that were maybe right to be ready for expansion. They kind of dedicated a staff person here, which is me, to just kind of really understand what's going on, the different technologies, the terms, asking questions. It's just totally overwhelming. Fiber to the node, fiber to the premise, DSLAMs, fixed wireless, and it takes some time to really sit down and have a clue about what those things are. So I also spent time identifying communities where momentum was building and where opportunities for expansion were ripe but not occurring without funding assistance. So 2 projects came to light. It was the Centurylink project expanding into Balkan Township and Side Lake, and then the Frontier Northeast Service Co-op Partnership project to expand into 20 townships, serving 800 households and 30 rural town hall and fire halls. Now, these projects were funded because the momentum had already started. Northeast Service Co-op was finishing their middle mile project. They had an established partnership with Frontier. So it kind of allowed us to come in as just a funding partner. The Balkan Broadband group had been it's a group of 5 townships. They had been actively seeking broadband expansion for years. So it really had to do with things that were already at play out in the communities, and the providers, wanting to expand but not being able to make their financial returns, and us coming in just to play that funder role. So based on these projects, we have many rural businesses that will benefit. We have a resort, from the resort owners up in Crane Lake to the gas station owner in Kelsey to the 10 rural businesses out in Balkan and Side Lake. We see the benefits that are going to happen for the household connections, for the student needs, telecommuting, online healthcare, and all those other quality of life opportunities that better broadband brings with it, and what it will bring to our communities to stay economically competitive in the long run. So just to kind of wrap up, as a funder, we've realized that expanding broadband into our rural areas is critical for us to stay competitive. These type of projects fall really cleanly within the IRRB mission and strategies. So really moving forward, for us to continue funding broadband projects, it's important for communities to build momentum, build positive relationships with the providers, and because otherwise funding, us as a funder won't be there if there's not the need out there and the momentum building and desire for these kind of projects. So that's it.
Thank you, Whitney. And here we have Patrick Haggerty from Centurylink talking about their project that partnered with DEED and with Iron Range Resources to serve a rural township area north of Hibbing. Patrick, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I just put a quick slide presentation together, thinking we had about 5 minutes. And where I'll start is actually on page 2. As Bill mentioned, Patrick with Centurylink. I'm the director of the Midwest region over legislative, regulatory, and local affairs. So I have a lot of opportunity to look into these types of potential partnering opportunities. And if I look back in time or over time, I know there was a point in that in which, as a company, communities, people of interest in trying to look at how we were going to put broadband further into the network, particularly in those areas in which the economics just didn't work out, the high-cost areas, if you will. Our response, under most circumstances, was no. We were focused on where we could see the economics as a privately held company, and weren't necessarily looking forward into the future of trying to extend broadband to everyone. A company that has its roots in much of rural America just hadn't really dawned on us until we started hearing from more and more communities. And as a result, we're now looking at what is the possibilities, or what are the possibilities of potentially partnering with communities, other private entities, you name it. I think we've been approached by it to try to solve the problem of overcoming the economics of again, deployment in particularly high-cost areas. Currently, I'm working directly with between 5 and 7 communities, depending on the level of engagement on their part, around how, solving this problem. And as I work with them, my intent is to create a model that going forward, through these learnings or through these experiences with other communities, we can apply as more communities step up and say, okay, we're interested as well now. So what I've done on slide 2 is somewhat lay out what I've been able to put together in terms of these discussions and planning sessions with the communities we're currently directly involved with. And the first is a needs assessment. The one thing that I think has been not necessarily a surprise, but at least has been brought to both my attention as well as the communities I'm working with attention, is a lot of times you just kind of jump in feet first and say, we have to have broadband. And as you really get into the detail of that, what I've seen is communities, working groups step back and say, wow, when we look at the details, we, one, recognize the realities of the cost of something like this. We recognize the realities of the investment like something like this. And we really started under the general idea that everybody needs broadband. And as we kind of pull all this together, we may need to be more specific about really where our needs are. And we may need to be a little bit more realistic about how quickly we can meet this holistic need, but be clear about how we want to identify steps towards that. So taking, smaller bites of the apple, if you will. And it's been, for me at least, somewhat of a relief, because when you kind of get a community to a place where they say, okay, we can't have it all now, but we can do some of this, and then you start going through the deliberations of, if we can't have it all now, what's most important to us? Where are our priorities? Is it the, anchor institutions? Is it the downtown community type center areas? Is it this area outside of town where really we're not confident we're going to have a high percentage of adoption? Granted, adoption is another challenge of all this, but initially, is that going to be our priority? So that's been a real breakthrough, I think, in terms of the partnership and experience I've had with them. The next, obviously, then is the cost, and that kind of goes into this we never imagined. And now that we recognize just what kind of investment this is, how do we go about solving for the investment? So, what is the cost assessment based on the needs and the needs that you initially want to start out with? And then for us, in terms of the partner, we truly go back and say, okay, what is our break-even point? Where is it that we can say this investment at least is going to return to the level of the investment? And once we've determined that break-even point, that really leaves what the remaining gap is. So then once you've got that remaining gap, you start talking about where the funding could come from. We've got the Department of Broadband. We've talked a lot about the partnerships here in the state of Minnesota, which have really been good and have really been a catalyst for a lot of what I'm discussing or what I'm sharing in terms of these not only partnerships we created with the IRRB in the last application cycle, but in these others I spoke of. So once we've determined, Centurylink determines break-even point, it's how do we solve for that remaining gap? Some of it could be through state funding programs, like have been talked about, and what's really the core of this discussion. But they could be others. They could be city bonds. They could be grants from outside the state. They could be low-interest loans. I mean, I think those types of creative solutions have come up in all the conversations I've had. And in fact, in the one I just was in a meeting with around yesterday, this community evidently has a level household incomes in their community that they're talking about as residents privately funding the gap. So I think, as you get the conversation started, there's a lot of creative ways to start trying to solve the problem, and particularly around the funding piece of it. And then the last, and this is, and transparency, this is the one that I haven't really had the experience of getting into yet. And other than working with Whitney and the IRRB, it's what is that contract between the private provider and the public entity, if you will, or whatever the other side of that contract is. And as a private entity, we're going to be looking for things within that contract, and as a community or a public entity, there's things that they got to have, and I think that's really where as they say, the devil's in the details. That'll be an interesting part to work through. In most cases, we're going to be concerned about the ownership of the network. What is our obligation to the network or the asset? Does the network transfer to the private entity immediately, or does it transfer to the private entity over time? And is there any lease back agreements with the public entity from the private entity? I mean, there's just a whole lot of details you can imagine to work through in that regard. But the good thing is I think we've gotten to the point where we're all at the table and willing to discuss the details of that. So moving forward, I just somewhat outlined the two applications that were approved in the 2014 border-to-border grant program cycle. The first one here I've got up is for the area of Foley. This was a straight partnership with the state and the Department of Broadband. It was a 50-50 split in terms of the cost of the project. You can see the total cost is $305,000, and the state and Centurylink invest $152,000 into the project. It's going to serve 380 unserved homes, 181 underserved homes, for a total of 561 homes that were currently unserved or underserved. By the end of September, will be served with broadband services of at least 40 meg down and 5 megabit up, or 40 meg down and 1 megabit up. And you can see the breakdown of those speeds that will be available to those households in the table below. 162 households served at 40 and 5, and 399 served at 40 and 1. The second project, and this was again new to us, and we are truly grateful to the IRRB and Whitney and the team over there for working with us around this. But you can see here, unique from the first application, we partnered with not only the state of Minnesota and the border-to-border grant program, but we also partnered with the IRRB. We each took on a 33% cut, if you want to look at it that way. This project, a little bit increase in investment, $690,000, but at the end it ended up serving 436 under or unserved homes. In this case, the split between 40 and 5 and 40 and 1 is 339 homes that will have access to 40 and 1, and then 97 homes that have access to the 40 and 5. So it was a great program for us. We're, construction season's open. We're working on these projects now. Expect to have them done by the end of the summer. We're already hearing some good stories come out of the areas. I think, in fact, even on a planning call for this webinar, we talked about a town hall that would now have access to the higher speeds, and their intent is to bring residents in, or at least make available to residents these speeds at the town hall for a period of time, I believe even free of charge, if I'm not mistaken. But you're already hearing the good stories come out of the results of this investment. So with that, Bill, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. And now we're going to hear from Lyle McVeigh, and Lyle works for the Northeast Service Co-op, and they're a partner with Frontier Communications. Go ahead, Lyle.
Thank you, Bill. It's good to be here today. I'm Lyle McVeigh. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Northeast Service Cooperative. The Northeast Service Cooperative has been serving as a provider in the region since about 1999. Our primary goal is we're one of 7 service cooperatives in the state of Minnesota, so we are truly public in nature. Our primary purpose is to serve our educational groups initially, and we're formed to be an educational service cooperative. Over the years, from 1999 to 2007, we progressed more and more into telecommunications in terms of our serving the groups and our members. And in 2009, we were told by USDA that would be a perfect candidate for the ERA broadband projects under the broadband initiatives that they had going on. And so we put in a project to construct a middle mile fiber project that ran through 8 counties. And has roughly served about 37 communities, and we've connected over 320 public institution, critical access institutions, all the way from healthcare to state parks, and along with education and such. So one of the things that moved us into public-private partnerships was that when USDA originally called us up on the Middle Mile project, they said, well, we'd like to fund your project, but it's a 50-50 award, meaning that there was a 50% grant, 50% loan. So we went from a $10 million loan to a $21.5 million loan, which was very significant in the sense that our original business plans had all been built around 10-year return on investments. And so one of the things you hear oftentimes in the private sector is the return on investment period. And I know Centurylink had, Pat had referenced that in terms of the return. Generally in the private sector, they like to see returns anywhere from 2.5 to as maybe if you're really pushing it out around 5 years. In the public sector, we oftentimes, whether it's infrastructure projects, we're willing to absorb longer return on investments and debt retirement as long as it has a public service basis to it. And so when we moved through this, one of the things we started reaching out was to the various carriers and partners that were out there. Frontier became our very first partner. They entered into an agreement with us that was a value of about $9.2 million over 10 years. And that really became the basis for our collaboration as a partnership between public and private. Now we have really kind of the next phase of the middle mile. We're closing down the middle mile this year, and the next phase was how do we start serving into last mile and leveraging the middle mile project. And we again reached out to Frontier, who has been an absolutely wonderful partner for us. And we said, how can we serve households and how can we bring broadband into those unserved areas? And so in working with Frontier, we identified areas within their infrastructure and their service areas that had either unserved or underserved households. And we came up with the project that we have here today, the Frontier NESC border-to-border project, and that is total cost of that project is $4.3 million. And we've been lucky enough that we've had really two major funding partners with us. One being the Office of Broadband at 1.9, and we have Iron Range Resources at 1.5. Frontier is bringing about 17% of the project at about $750,000. And how that public-private partnership works is that NESC is the lead grant recipient for the funding, and also the lead in terms of the overall project construction. And so we'll actually construct all of the infrastructure and resources that are required to serve the 877 households. It roughly requires about 76 miles of new fiber construction. And part of the critical access institution benefits is that we're going to connect up 30 connections to town halls and fire halls and give them 2 years of service. So we've got a great project here. It's moving forward. One of the things that Pat brought up was the whole contract details. And, in our first round, we find that it took us almost 1.5 years, almost 2 years to build that initial partnership around contracts within the that they're actually used quite commonly within the telecommunication industry. And so the average person might view it as a lease, a fiber lease, a long-term fiber lease. The term used in the industry is an indefeasible right of use, and it's actually a form of an asset sale, though. over time. But it allows the private partner to acquire an asset position in the public infrastructure and ensures that they have the control that they need to be able to make further investment in terms of the electronics. And so the border-to-border project is actually very similar, except that in this project, we not only have fiber assets, but we have equipment assets that are involved. And that's when Whitney was referencing DSLAMs, and the DSLAM is where the aggregation point where all of your home subscribers come to a single access point, and the fiber connects. So, often people call that fiber to the node. And so this project is basically one of those things where we're able to serve the 877. We have a much larger impact of potentially up around 2,500 subscribers that will see broadband rates that won't quite meet the state of Minnesota goals, which is a 10.5, but we'll see definitely improved service, where they haven't had any service at all. So, Bill, I think that's really all I had on my list here.
Thank you, Lyle. I appreciate that. That's getting multiple parties in the room together. That's got to be a fun adventure. What people, once again, people need to understand what priorities and goals are to be able to be a good partner. And then finally, we have Kyle Odre from Rock County, and they're down in the southwest corner of Minnesota. So we've got both northeast and central, and then southwest covered. Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Rock County Broadband Alliance really started at the same time as the Office of Broadband Development made the announcement for grants. We started working with Alliance Communication along with others, but prior to that, we identified the problem. We had few options to our rural customers, like many plans that we did have had extremely high fees. There were data limits, data caps. We had a radio station where they were buying through Verizon, and it actually shut them off at about three quarters into the month because they'd hit their usage cap. The speed for conducting even normal or simple business transactions wasn't available. We had a push from residents. We had a lead on the County Board of Commissioners that said, hey, we need to find a way to solve this for our residents. There's no question that the County Board took this on as pure infrastructure. They looked at it as you would roads, bridges, water supplies, anything like that. So we started with discussions with current providers. You can see on the list who our current folks were, and we had mixed reaction from the folks at the table. Verizon is what it is. It's big. They basically claimed that what they had available was what they were going to offer. There weren't a lot of changes in sight for them. Centurylink, we didn't meet certain population density. You heard an earlier speaker talk about return and population. We're small, we're rural, and it would have been tough for them to come in and spend large chunks of money to meet what we thought we needed to have, along with Exceed and Frontier. So we moved on to other providers that were within the region. MVTV, who many of you are probably familiar with, they're out of Granite Falls. They're a cooperative. Lismore's a cooperative, just in Nobles County, which is my neighbor to the east. And Alliance Communication, which is a co-op out of Garrettson, South Dakota. We border Iowa and South Dakota, and Garrettson, their corporate headquarters from Laverne, which is our county seat, is probably 20 miles. So we met with each of these folks, and then we laid our plate out on the table and said, hey, can you help us? What things can you offer? And it always comes back to money as the issue. So when we meet with them, we talk about what partnership, what can we offer? And what came back is MVTV expanded into Rock County, along with many of the counties along the southern border. They didn't hit the speeds that we were still hoping to obtain. MVTV has been great. Lismore Telephone Co-op, they stepped up and they tried to develop a wireless solution, and they're continuing to try to develop that wireless solution. Not so much for Rock County at this point, but more into Nobles County and up into Murray County. And lastly, Alliance Communication and our Fiber to the Home project. Alliance said, hey, look, we're willing to come up with half. And at that time, we'd kind of anticipated the budget to be around $12 million. They said, we'll do fiber to the home. Every rural resident in the county, minus the city of Laverne, because that wasn't classified as an underserved area. We'll do countywide fiber if you can come up with half. Well, we knew then what our goal was. So we went back and we started working with the Broadband Task Force. We got our application in there, and we were fortunate. I mean, we were unbelievably fortunate that we received a $5 million broadband grant. Rock County then did something that we had never done before either. We did a $1 million tax abatement bond to come up with an additional $1 million to finish out the project. And we know that the FCC CAF money is going to be coming down, and we know Alliance will be applying for that as well. So the actual funding for the project looks like this. The total project cost is $14.95 million for us. The Alliance Communications putting in $8.95, and then with the grant and the bond. So this is to me, it's an absolutely clear example of your public-private partnership. We're all putting skin in the game. We're all putting money in. It's something our residents wanted, even during the tax abatement bond process, where we had to have the public hearing. And we're not a county that borrows money lightly. We had anticipated some feedback from the residents, and we got feedback all right, but it was all positive. We didn't have anyone saying, "Wow, you lost your mind. You're borrowing money for this." And the reality was that the cash bond going forward was very well received. What was the impact? Well, we're putting 600 miles of fiber in, and in talking with the Office of Broadband, I think the statewide that they're hoping to accomplish 700 miles with these grants. So you can see 600 of it's going to Rock. 1,261 homes and farms. We've got our businesses and our anchor institutions. But what we felt was so important, and I know that some of the discussion was, what does everybody need to have? We felt that if we cherry picked, if we picked just businesses, or if we picked just anchor institutions, or if we picked just communities, we would never hit our rural customers. So the priority from minute one, day one, was that we're doing it for everyone, and that's why it became such an important part of our project to make sure every resident, every acreage, every property owner would have fiber right to their door, and that's what it does. The initial bundle, and we're talking only here about the fiber part of the broadband. But when Alliance comes in, they offer the bundle. You'll have telephone, you'll have high definition television, and then you'll have this base level speed, which you can upgrade to 100 by 25 if you choose to as a resident. And realistically, they've told us they can offer gigabyte speed right now, even though they're not marketing it. They do offer it in a couple in their other territory. 125 is what their biggest advertised speed is, but they would provide gigabyte if anyone needed it. I'm not a techie guy. Gigabyte speed to me seems pretty fast. So that's what they're offering. Advice, and I promise to be brief. Meet with everyone. Anybody that you can think that might be a provider, meet with them. Sit down and find out what their challenges are, what their hurdles are, what they need. Lay to them, explain to them as a provider, because they want to help. I mean, whether you're private or a co-op or whatever the case might be, they want to try to help. So give them the opportunity to help you after you've identified where your real snags are, what your issues are, and then continue to stress that problem. Find these partners, work with these partners. We were blessed working with a co-op. Co-op is different than a lot of private companies. A co-op can really only expand within where they're at. You know, you're a co-op in Garrettson, you can't pick up and expand in St. Cloud. You've got to stay and grow your territory where you're at. So we were blessed to be surrounded by co-ops. Co-ops in this community is a very well understood model. Ag co-ops have been around for, I think the slide was 1908. You can saw the telephone co-op model. We've been ag co-ops forever down here, so that people endorsed it, people understood it, and they welcomed it. And then lastly, I think, be a squeaky wheel. We had a commissioner that went up and testified to work hard to get that broadband money. I think the legislators need to continue to hear it. Even though we've been successful, we're making our calls to say, keep this funding going, because just because Rock County's problem fixed doesn't mean our friends and neighbors, Pipestone, Murray, Nobles, whoever, Cook County, they don't still need the funding, and let's help them get to where they need to go as well. Quick, I think I went 1 minute over, Bill. I apologize for that, and I'll stop.
Not a problem, not a problem. Patrick, a couple questions for you. One is about the speeds. We saw that you have kind of two levels of speed, and especially in the upload speed. And I know you're not the technical guy in the team for Centurylink, but could you share a little bit about why some are 5 megs up and some are only 1 meg up?
Yeah, sure. It all boils down to, as others on the call that work with networks, build networks, it all boils down to, at least with DSL, loop length. And to extend out as far as we could, some of those customers at the end of those loops aren't going to be able to acquire the upload speed that the others closer to the remote terminal in this case, or where the electronics are located to regenerate the DSL signal, are going to get. So it really just boils down to the technical limitations of the technology that we're deploying to them.
Okay. And then a question on the cost per, this person asked about household capital cost, but per connection. And then I know that there's been some discussion at the legislature this year about the cost per household connection being seen as quite high, and that the Office of Broadband has talked about the leverage that these networks investments will enable for other expansions, other service things. So can you touch on those two factors?
Well, yeah, you know, in this meeting I kind of referenced I had with the community yesterday. I'd used the Office of Broadband criteria for the border-to-border grant program, and I'd taken my own swipe at trying to, you know, from a scoring perspective, high, medium, low, at the project that we were working on, and in terms of if we were to go forward in 2015, the legislature was to put some to allocate some additional funding, and we're moving forward with all that theoretically in place. If we were to submit this as an application, where would we fall out? And in that particular case, there are communities that has large acreages, homes on between 5, 8, and 10 acre lots, so the density wasn't there. It was a small number of homes they needed to address, and ultimately, because of that lack of density, primarily, the investment to build the network was pretty significant, and the cost per household in that regard came out very high, and that is an element of what the Office of Broadband looks at. You know, I don't know the weighting of that element necessarily, but it is something to be considered. And so, you know, in kind of evaluating and taking my own run at trying to score this, we scored that particular element of the criteria as low. And I think, you know, from an investment perspective, particularly as technologies advance, whether it be the fixed wireless type technologies, there are a lot of our primary vendors in at least the telecom industry right now trying to technically bring down the cost of providing service in high cost areas. So when you look at a cost per household, and ultimately, yeah, your wish list would say, let's take fiber to every home, and where that works, that's wonderful, because I think you have, to some degree, to say future-proofed it, and you pretty much have overcome any of the obstacles in terms of technologies down the road that may be presented and you may want to consume as a consumer. But ultimately, if that isn't in the cards, at least initially, that cost of household cost per household passed is a way of saying this is the investment. It's a significant investment. Does that investment exceed what we kind of outlined as the goals of this program or this partnership? I don't know if that answered the question, Bill, but to us, you know, as a company, as a private partner in this, we look at overall cost. The cost per household pass plays into it when we look at the returns, because obviously each of those households we have to assume to one degree or another is or isn't going to subscribe to the service. That's a factor when you look at your ROI on these. And so if there's fewer households and therefore fewer potential subscribers to receive subscriber fees from, that brings that makes the ROI that much more challenging.
Okay. And I think it's interesting to see, you know, certainly it's the cost effectiveness of supporting an incumbent to deliver service, you know, the 40 meg, 5 up, you know, 40 down, you know, at $630,000, that's $690,000 for, you know, 430 households. It seems to be about $1,600 or $1,700. I'm just doing that in my head. So, which is pretty affordable compared to a brand new fiber build, overbuild. There's my own editorial. It's certainly nice to have some competition. It's certainly nice to have fiber to the home as well, but you can see the cost differentiation there. Lyle, I have a question.
And we always have.
Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
I was going to say, Bill, we as providers can somewhat understand where the consumer's at in terms of bandwidth consumption. And at this point, we're not, a fiber to the home network sets you up really well to be offered those symmetrical gig type speeds. But in most cases, the consumers we see anyways, and we know where our kind of our average bandwidth consumption consumer is at, 40 meg is meeting the needs of a significant majority of consumers that are out there. So if you can do it, as you had said, for 36 home for 690,000, but one of the criteria of, as we all know, of the broad border-to-border grant program is that that in order to meet the initial qualification, you've got to build a network that has the capabilities of continuing to evolve towards, I think it was a gig service, and in building this project, we got fiber further into that network. Now we expect to, carry the last mile, as they call it, is going to be sort of by copper transport, but that doesn't mean that going forward, continued investment will ultimately get fiber to that home. So this was a significant step forward in the infrastructure that down the road, as bandwidth consumption continues to increase, as we all know, it's pretty much vertical right now. We're in a good position to make that secondary investment to extend the fiber further out. So it's I guess what I'd say, it's a good initial step.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, excuse me, Patrick, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit on CAF 2 funding. Is there any, going to make an announcement today about Centurylink's intentions on that, or do we have to wait for the August deadline?
I think we're going to, of the 120 days, Bill, I think are expecting to take 119. I can share, I mean, I don't know if it's an update to the folks on this call, but the finalized modeling has come out. The grants at a state level or the opportunities at a state level for eligible ILX are out there. In our case, it's a little north of $54 million over a 6-year period. We, as Bill, you're pointing out here, we're in a position now to decide whether or not we accept or decline as first right of refusal, decline or accept or decline those. What we're going through now is with this finalized modeling, going through and understanding really what it will, from a cost perspective, what it will take to meet or to fulfill this build, and whether or not that $54 million for us at least covers the cost of that. And I think it's going to take all of the 120 days for us to make that decision, Bill. And I keep referencing this meeting yesterday, and they're a community that does have particularly some CAF funding that could be applied. And so the follow-up to this is, will Centurylink or any of the ILX in the state decline this opportunity? What happens then? Well, the way the FCC set it up is that it's either accepted or declined at a state level. So in the event that Centurylink, if we accept it, we move forward, we start to build. If we decline it, it would then go into the auction process. And what's concerning about that, and I should say that Centurylink is looking in every way to say yes to this. It's just a matter of being prudent about using our shareholders' funding to whether or not it's a prudent investment. But at the end of the day, if we were to decline, I think we're looking at 2 years down the road, probably on the optimistic side, before the auction process would complete itself, and the winning bids in that auction process would start to see some construction. So if that's the concerning part, is if through this first phase anybody declines, it's going to be a period of time before we start to see that investment through the auction process returned.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that update. That gets really complicated for you as well as for the communities out there. So I appreciate that. I see that we're at 4 o'clock, and so I want to thank our participants for joining us, and thank our speakers, Whitney, Patrick, Kyle, and Lyle. So thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Mary.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thanks to Jane as well, Patrick, Lyle, Kyle, and Whitney for joining us on the webinar today. Our next webinar is going to be Thursday, June 18th from 3 to 4 p.m. Please note that we've moved that next month's webinar to the 3rd week instead of 2nd week. So if your invitation comes a little late, that's why. The topic in June is going to be, we're going to be talking about the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Thanks everyone for attending, and have a great rest of your day.